Have you ever walked into a room and felt like your brilliance was invisible? Like no matter how hard you worked, how brightly you shone, someone still looked past you as if you didn't belong in the story they were writing. Zuri Adabio had walked into rooms like that all her life. But one day she decided she wasn't going to shrink anymore. Because sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one no one saw coming. In today's story, you'll meet a woman whose name deserves to echo far beyond any ivy-covered campus. A law student who rose from a modest Chicago neighborhood to deliver a speech that silenced 1,000 people and exposed the quiet prejudice of the city's elite. You'll see how she navigates love legacy and layered racism. Not with anger, but with elegance. Not with revenge, but with resolve. And by the end, you'll understand something deeper, that justice doesn't always start in courtrooms. Sometimes it begins at the dinner table in a silence that says everything. So stay with us. Because this isn't just a story about law school or family drama. It's about what happens when a young black woman dares to walk into a world built to erase her and chooses not to disappear. Before she was a valedictorian, before the standing ovations, Zuri was just a girl. Watching her mother pack library books at 6 a.m. and learning from her father how to fix things, even when the world said they were too broken. And today we begin where her story turns a spring afternoon under the wide-open sky of the University of Chicago, where her high bun gleamed like a crown, and where her truth was about to break the silence. Let me take you there. Long before the speeches, the applause, or the spotlight, Zuri Adabio was just a little girl with big eyes and even bigger questions. She grew up on the south side of Evanston in a two-bedroom apartment where the heat clanked in the winter and dreams had to be louder than the noise outside. Her mother, Miriam, was a librarian who worked double shifts to keep food on the table and still found time to bring home new books every Friday. Her father, Darnell, was a mechanic who taught Zuri more than just how to fix carburetors. He taught her that when the world breaks something, sometimes you're the one who has to put it back together. Every evening, while her classmates were out riding bikes or scrolling through their phones, Zuri sat at the kitchen table reading civil rights case studies, taking notes in spiral-bound notebooks, and memorizing court rulings like they were bedtime stories. Her heroes weren't on television. They were names she underlined in library books: Constance Baker Motley, Thurgood Marshall, Pauli Murray. She didn't just want to be a lawyer, she wanted to change the rules. But ambition like that doesn't always come with applause. In high school, she was told by a guidance counselor that kids like you should aim for something practical like community college. She'd once overheard a parent during a debate tournament whisper, "She only won because of the diversity points." Those words stung, but they didn't stick, because Zuri knew what the world couldn't yet see. She wasn't some lucky exception. She was the result of persistence, of sacrifice, and of extraordinary love. And so she kept going. She earned a full scholarship to the University of Chicago Law School, not because of a program, but because of her 4.0 GPA, her LSAT score that put her in the top 2%, and her personal statement that made even the admissions board weep. She became editor of the Law Review, interned with the Innocence Project, argued mock cases that left judges speechless, and through it all, she wore her hair in a high bun, not because it was fashionable, but because it reminded her of who she was and how high she'd had to hold her head just to be seen. You see, that bun wasn't just a hairstyle, it was a crown, a quiet, unwavering declaration that her presence in those spaces wasn't accidental. She belonged whether others saw it or not. And that's the thing. Sometimes the world won't recognize your crown until you make them look up. That's the first lesson Zuri learned. You can't wait for permission to shine. You have to show up, stand tall, and let your light speak even if they squint to see it. But no matter how far she had come, Zuri's greatest test wasn't a courtroom or a classroom. It was standing in front of people who claimed to love the person she loved most, and seeing in their eyes a question she had already answered her whole life. Are you enough? And that brings us to where everything changed. The University of Chicago Law graduation, the quad buzzing with celebration, and three polished figures stepping into her story with smiles as sharp as diamonds. Let's step into that moment. Zuri met Cale Morrow during her second year at law school. It wasn't one of those dramatic whirlwind moments. No accidental coffee spills or instant sparks. It began with a missed pen. She was in the library, papers spread, headphones in, when a quiet voice beside her said, "Hey, you mind if I borrow that? Kale had that kind of presence. Not loud, not demanding, just steady. The kind of person who listened before he spoke, who stayed behind after class to help clean up group notes, whose smile made even the most competitive study sessions feel a little less like battlefields. They started slowly, first as partners in mock trial, then late-night study breaks, then weekend jazz club dates and long walks by the lake. Cale was the son of a prominent Chicago family, but he never acted like it. He loved coding indie records and mango sorbet. He called Zuri brilliant even before she believed it herself. And for the first time in a long time, Zuri felt seen. But here's what no one tells you. Sometimes being seen isn't the same as being understood. And being loved doesn't always mean being defended. Zuri and Cale had what looked like the perfect love story, two students from different worlds finding each other in a place that tested everyone. But beneath the soft moments and shared dreams was a truth Zuri didn't want to face. She wasn't just loving Cale. She was stepping into his legacy. And legacies don't always welcome new blood, especially when it comes in a different shade. Cale told her about his family in snippets, a mother who was polished and firm, a father who ran real estate ventures across the city, a sister who worked in luxury branding and seemed to have never taken a wrong step. They're intense, but they'll love you once they meet you, he said. I've told them everything about you. Zuri wanted to believe him, and in a way she did, but there was always a pause in his voice when he mentioned his mother, a flicker in his eyes when she asked if they'd been told she was black. Because the truth is, even the kindest man can carry silence like a shield. Even love can feel safe until it's asked to be brave. Zuri had been in love before. She'd known what it felt like to be the strong one, the patient one, the one always explaining, always translating her world into something palatable. But with Cale, she hoped just maybe she wouldn't have to do that dance. She hoped this love would be different. But love without truth is fragile, and truth without courage is just a whisper. That was the second lesson Zuri would come to learn. The person who loves you has to be willing to fight for you, especially when it's hardest. Because some battles aren't fought in courtrooms. They're fought in dining rooms, in family introductions, in choosing whose discomfort you protect. And Zuri was about to find out not all love stories come without terms and conditions. The day of graduation arrived like a dream. Sunlight spilled across the quad. Zuri's high bun gleamed like a crown. And as she adjusted her robe, her phone buzzed. Almost there, love. You're going to kill it. Cale's message, simple, sweet, comforting. But as she looked up and saw him walking toward her, his family gliding behind him like ghosts in designer suits, Zuri felt it. Not fear, not doubt, but a question rising in her chest. Would this be the moment she was celebrated, or the moment she was measured? Let's walk with her as she finds out. The University of Chicago's quad shimmered under the late spring sun. Navy gowns floated like waves across the lawn. Parents laughed, professors hugged, cameras clicked. It was the kind of day meant to feel golden, etched into memory. Zuri stood near the fountain, her reflection dancing across the rippling surface. Her plum dress, soft yet striking beneath her robe, felt like both armor and poetry. She'd made it. Top of her class, valedictorian, a daughter of working-class Evanston, ready to deliver a speech that carried her entire journey. And then she saw them. Cale walking toward her sharp in a gray suit. Behind him, three silhouettes of generational wealth. Vivian Morrow moved like a verdict. Cream dress, pearls, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her husband Gerard, all broad shoulders and silent calculation. And Camille Cale's sister, red lips, designer heels, and an expression that said she'd size Zuri up before even saying hello. Zuri Cale beamed, pulling her into a quick embrace. You look incredible. His cedar scent was grounding, but his glance just slightly flicked toward his mother. Zuri noticed. Thank you, she smiled, steadying her breath. Ready for this circus? Then came the handshake. Vivian reached out, but barely. A brush of fingers. Like touching something unfamiliar she wasn't quite sure she approved of. That dress is bold, she said, her voice smooth, rehearsed. Quite a statement for today. Zuri smiled with practiced grace. Thank you, Mrs. Morrow. I wanted to honor the occasion. But she heard it. Bold. The coded word. A compliment dressed as a critique, subtle, sharpened. Gerard added his own version. Kale's told us about you. Law school's no joke. Must have worked hard to keep up, keep up, as if she hadn't led the pack, as if her place on the podium was an anomaly, not a certainty. Camille's turn. Oh, I bet. Full scholarship, right? That's fortunate. Not everyone gets those breaks. Zuri's pulse quickened. Breaks. Fortune. Words wrapped in sugar, dipped in steel. But she kept her voice calm. Fortune favors the prepared. I made sure I was. She'd been here before. In classrooms where professors asked if she was lost. In interviews where they looked surprised she knew case law by heart. And now here again. But this time the scrutiny wasn't from strangers. It was from the family of the man she loved. Kale gently touched her hand. Zuri's brilliant, he said, trying to anchor the moment. She's about to blow everyone away. Vivian nodded politely. How inspiring. I'm sure it'll be memorable. Then turning to Kale, she added, Darling, let's find our seats. You'll want a good view of the stage. Zuri stood still as they walked away, a trio of polished dismissal. Behind them, Camille's voice floated through the crowd. Lucky break, that valedictorian spot. Wonder how she pulled it off. And just like that, the air changed. The warmth of the day dimmed. And Zuri was reminded of a truth too familiar to forget. Sometimes the rooms you fought the hardest to enter are the ones that fight hardest to push you back out. She adjusted her bun, her crown of quiet defiance, and breathed in. She had a speech to give. One not just for graduates, but for every girl like her who'd ever been told she was lucky to be here. That was the third lesson Zuri carried with her. Legacy means nothing if it erases the worth of those who come after. And real love should never require silence in the face of harm. As the auditorium doors opened and names were called, Zuri walked toward the stage, heels clicking like declarations. She wasn't just walking to speak, she was walking to be seen. And as she stepped into the spotlight, her eyes scanned the front row, where Kale sat beaming and his family sat still. Let's hear what she had to say. The applause still echoed in the auditorium when Zuri stepped off the stage. Her speech had soared clear, resonant, unforgettable. She had spoken of justice, of her parents' sacrifices, of the quiet strength it takes to walk into rooms not built for you and to speak anyway. A professor had wiped a tear. Her classmates had risen to their feet. Even a few skeptical deans had nodded in grudging respect. But in the front row, the Marrow family sat still. Vivian's hands were folded in her lap. Gerard offered a slow clap, as if acknowledging a weather report. Camille leaned toward her father and whispered something with a smirk. Zuri saw it all, not just the lack of applause, but the absence of recognition, as if her words had bounced off glass. And then came the moment that cracked something she hadn't even realized was fragile. Vivian rose, smoothing her cream dress, and turned to Kale. Darling, let's get a family photo by the podium. Just us. Her tone was soft but final. Camille and Gerard moved instinctively, like this was already decided. Zuri paused just behind them, diploma still in hand. Kale shifted, caught between. He turned to his mother. Mom, Zuri should be in it. This is her day. Vivian's smile was tight. Oh, of course. But we need one for the family album. Zuri's got plenty of friends to pose with, I'm sure. Camille added, her voice syrupy. Yeah, you probably want pics with your study group or whatever. The camera was already being lifted, and in that flash of choreography, Zuri was left out of the frame. She looked at Kale, her eyes searching. For protest, for refusal, for something. But he hesitated. His hand reached for her, then dropped. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. It's just one photo, Zuri. We'll take more with you after. And that was the deeper cut. Not the slight from his mother, not Camille's passive exclusion, but his silence. His compromise, the quiet choice to make space for her later, instead of fighting for her now. In that moment, Zuri felt the weight of every room she had ever entered, every table she had never been invited to, every gesture that said, you're almost enough, but not quite. It wasn't just a photo, it was a mirror. And what she saw reflected back was a man she loved, still learning how to stand. That was the fourth lesson: silence isn't neutral. It's a choice. And sometimes it hurts more than the words themselves. Zuri didn't cry. She didn't storm out. She simply stood taller, her bun still high, and let them take their photo. She was used to being invisible, but that didn't mean she would accept it. The celebration moved forward. The graduates flooded the quad. Laughter rang out, photos, snapped, hugs exchanged. But for Zuri, the joy was dimmed, because the person who should have held the umbrella had let her stand in the rain. Still, she had dinner to attend, another performance to give, this time not on stage, but at the Morrow family's private table. And this time she wasn't bringing just a smile, she was bringing the storm. Let's join her there. The rooftop dining room at Lucille shimmered like a movie set. Linen-draped tables, crystal glassware, the low hum of live jazz drifting from the corner. It was the kind of place where every detail whispered prestige and where expectations, though unspoken, sat at the table before the guests ever did. Zuri arrived a few minutes early, escorted by Kale. He held her hand as they walked in, but his fingers twitched with the kind of tension that only grows around family. Still, Zuri had come prepared. Her bun was flawless. Her dress the same regal plum that had caught the sunlight at graduation, caught the chandeliers now. Her smile steady but watchful. She wasn't just showing up. She was walking into territory that didn't want her there, and claiming her seat anyway. Vivian sat at the head of the table, her cream blouse, pristine eyes cool. Gerard offered a polite nod. Camille scrolled her phone, barely glancing up. It didn't take long. Vivian began with a practiced elegance. Zuri, your speech was very passionate. Where did you say you grew up again? Somewhere vibrant, I assume vibrant. Another word in the coded language of class and color. A suggestion that her neighborhood was rough, loud, perhaps a little dangerous. Certainly nothing like their gated suburbs. Zuri kept her tone warm. Evanston, a working-class neighborhood, yes, but full of heart. My parents made sure I had everything I needed, even if it meant they went without. Camille looked up, blinking. Evanston's cute, I guess. But seriously, you went from there to Valedictorian? That's unexpected. Zuri's fork paused midair. Unexpected. As if excellence had a zip code. As if brilliance only bloomed in manicured gardens. She smiled gently. I've learned hard work, Bridges, more than geography. Step by step, I built my path. But the knives kept coming. This time from Gerard, public interest law, right? That's noble. Doesn't pay much, though. Kale's used to a certain lifestyle. Zuri set down her fork. I fight for people who need a voice, Mr. Morrow. And yes, it's hard work. But that work changes lives. And Kale supports what I do fully. She looked at Kale as she said it. Not because she needed his validation, but because she needed his presence. Vivian laughed lightly, swirling her wine. How admirable. Though surely it must be exhausting dealing with such heavy topics all the time. Zuri's jaw tightened. Heavy. As if the lives she defended were burdens, not battles worth fighting. As if her calling was inconvenient. She leaned in. It's rewarding, actually. Helping a family avoid eviction or reuniting a child with their parent. That doesn't feel heavy. It feels right. The air thinned. Even the jazz seemed to quiet. And then Camille delivered the cut. But really, isn't it hard having to constantly prove yourself? Not everyone sees you as valedictorian material. There it was. The truth behind every comment. The doubt behind every smile. Not about her degree, but about her right to have it. Zuri breathed in. She could have smiled and let it pass. She could have laughed it off. But some moments demand more than grace. They demand truth. She set down her napkin. Her voice was low, calm, unshaken. Camille, I've had to prove myself my entire life, not because I wasn't capable, but because people assume I'm not before I've even opened my mouth. Her words hung in the air, each one weighted with experience. You may see a scholarship, a dress, a background, but what you don't see is the grind, the nights I stayed up writing briefs while my mom cleaned schools. The morning I walked into class after my father lost his job, still ready to argue precedent. You don't see that because you never had to. Silence fell over the table. Kale's hand found hers warm tight, but she didn't need it to keep going. She was already standing, if not in body, then in spirit. And that was her fifth lesson: dignity doesn't whisper. It speaks when others expect you to be quiet. Zuri hadn't planned to confront anyone that night, but dignity has its own timing, and when it knocks, you answer. The server returned with dessert menus. The moment eased slightly, but underneath the silverware and polite smiles the air crackled. The storm was not over, it was just gathering. And Zuri, head high, voice steady, was ready to walk straight through it. Because some truths don't belong in speeches. They belong at the dinner table, and the next course would come with a side of reckoning. Let's see what they served next. The chandelier above the Morrow family's private table at Lisieux cast a warm, honeyed glow, but beneath it the air was sharp, sliced into silence, thin smiles, and perfectly folded napkins. Zuri sat poised, her posture impeccable, her plum dress catching the light like quiet defiance. She just held her own across a battlefield of passive aggression, and yet she knew the dinner wasn't done. In rooms like this, the dessert never comes before the real bitterness. Camille, still playing with her spoon, broke the silence with the soft clink of silver on porcelain. So Zuri, she said, as if making casual conversation, Kale mentioned your scholarship earlier. Was it one of those diversity programs? Zuri's heart thudded, once then steadied. She'd heard this tone before. The kind that wrapped condescension in curiosity. The kind that reduced a lifetime of effort to a checkbox. She met Camille's gaze calm and unwavering. No, she said gently. I earned my scholarship through grades, test scores, and more work than most people ever see. Northwestern didn't give me anything I didn't deserve. Gerard cleared his throat, setting down his wine glass. They're generous with those now, I hear. Generous. As if fairness was a favor. As if Zuri had been granted mercy rather than merit. She smiled, but her spine remained steel. I suppose I'm grateful they still recognize excellence when they see it. The room fell quiet again. Then Camille leaned back, folding her arms. But honestly, it must be tough. Always having to prove you belong. That's got to get exhausting. Zuri blinked, not at the comment itself, but at the sheer lack of awareness. Yes, it was exhausting. But not for the reason Camille thought. It wasn't proving she belonged that wore Zuri down. It was the constant expectation that she shouldn't. She set down her fork, letting the pause speak before her words did. I don't have to prove I belong, she said softly. I am here. That's proof enough. Then she added just as gently, but the exhausting part, it's listening to people wonder out loud if I should be. Vivian, who had been sipping her wine quietly, finally spoke. Her voice was smooth, diplomatic, but sharpened like the edge of her knife. You're clearly driven, Zuri. No one's questioning that. But you must understand Kale's future requires a certain alignment. Alignment. The word landed like a veiled judgment, not spoken in anger, not shouted, but delivered with the soft certainty of someone who thought they were simply stating facts. Zuri felt it deep in her chest. She was misaligned, too bold, too black, too driven, too honest, too much of everything this family had never had to make space for. And yet she didn't flinch. Because that's the thing about dignity. Once you claim it, no one can resize you to fit their comfort. That was the sixth lesson Zuri carried into that room. When someone tells you they don't see a place for you at their table, build your own and bring a longer table for others. Across from her, Kale sat frozen, his hand in hers, but his voice still missing. Zuri could feel his conflict like a pulse. He loved her, that she never doubted. But love by itself had limits, especially when it's afraid of shaking the foundation it was raised on. The server returned, clearing plates for the next course. Conversation shifted to wine pairings and weather, but the tension didn't leave. It merely settled deeper into the linen. Zuri adjusted her posture, her bun still pristine, a crown of resistance. She knew this wasn't the end of it. Vivian wasn't finished. Camille had more to say. And Kale, he had a decision to make, because dinner at the Morrow table wasn't just about family. It was a test of belonging, and the cost of passing might be her silence. But Zuri wasn't born to be silent, and very soon she would remind them in Kale exactly what standing looked like. Let's stay at the table. The final course is coming. The creme brulee was still untouched when the final blow landed. Camille, napkin resting delicately in her lap, smiled over the rim of her glass. You know, Zuri, she said sweetly, your speech was cute, very rags to riches. But honestly, aren't those stories a little tired? Like, who really buys that anymore? Vivian laughed softly, the sound brittle like cracked porcelain. She's fiery, I'll give her that, she added, tilting her head toward Gerard. But it all felt a bit theatrical, don't you think? Not really the kind of tone that fits Kale's world. The room didn't go silent immediately, but something changed, a subtle shift in the air, like a storm had just cleared its throat. Zuri blinked, not from shock. She had known this moment might come, but even then some wounds always feel fresh. She glanced at Kale, his jaw clenched. His hand still rested on hers, but it was still uncertain. He didn't speak. And that silence after everything cut deeper than the insult. Because when someone mocks your life to your face, and the person you love doesn't stop them, you begin to wonder who's really holding your hand, and who's just afraid to let go. Zuri exhaled, not shakily, just decisively. Then without ceremony she stood. The table fell quiet. A few heads from nearby tables turned. The jazz trio in the corner paused just for a moment. Zuri's voice when it came wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the clarity of someone who had rehearsed this speech her whole life, not in front of mirrors, but in classrooms, courtrooms, and now in enemy territory. I'd like to add something, she said. She looked to Camille, then to Vivian, then to Gerard. You've questioned my story, my worth, my place in this room. She paused. But let's be honest, this isn't really about my degree or my speech. It's about my skin. It's about my roots. It's about the discomfort you feel when someone like me, black proud and unapologetically present, dares to sit at your table without asking permission. The words didn't rise in volume, but they struck like thunder. Across the room, forks paused midair. A professor from the law school straightened in her chair. Someone gasped, barely audible. Zuri continued. I earned everything I've achieved, every late night, every closed door I pushed through, every time I had to smile through someone asking if I was the intern or diversity hire. I've been called lucky more times than I can count. But I'm not lucky. I'm ready. And I am more than enough for this room, for your son, and for the legacy you're so afraid I might rewrite. Vivian's wineglass trembled slightly. Camille's smirk disappeared. Gerard looked away. Zuri turned to Kale. Her voice softened just a shade. I don't need you to rescue me, Kale, but I need you to stand beside me, not behind, not later, now. And then came the moment, the one that split the room. Kale stood. His chair scraped the floor like punctuation. His voice was firm, low, but resolute. Enough, he said. He looked at his mother, his sister, his father. You've judged her all night. You've questioned her work, her voice, her value, and I let it happen. But no more. Zuri is the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. And if you can't see that, if you can't respect that, then you're not just pushing her away. You're pushing me away too. The silence was complete. No music, no forks, no wine swirling. Just the echo of truth settling in crystal and stone. That was the seventh lesson Zuri lived and gave that night. Sometimes love means standing up, even if it means standing alone. And sometimes when you do, you find you weren't alone after all. Kale's hand reached for hers, this time not with hesitation, but with certainty. Zuri took it gracefully, but not as surrender, as choice. Because dignity doesn't mean going to war alone. It means choosing the battles worth fighting and choosing who's worth fighting with. But the night wasn't over. Not yet. The Moreaus hadn't left the table. Their pride was bruised but not broken. And Zuri knew the final act of any reckoning comes not in confrontation, but in what follows. Let's see what happened after the storm. For a moment, the rooftop dining room stood suspended in stillness. The chandelier flickered above untouched desserts and shattered expectations. Vivian's lips parted, but no words came. Camille stared at her plate. Gerard's fork was frozen midair, like even his movements had lost confidence. But before anyone could speak, before the Moreaus could regroup, recover, retaliate, a new voice cut through the hush. It was calm, measured, yet it held a kind of authority that made even silence listen. Zuri Adabio, it called. Heads turned. Even the jazz band paused again. A woman approached, tall, elegant, with silver-streaked hair and wire-rimmed glasses that shimmered under the chandelier. Professor Elaine Carver, a legend in constitutional law, the kind of professor whose syllabus students saved as keepsakes. She didn't smile. She beamed, and only at Zuri. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said, though everyone in the room knew she was beautifully. I've just spoken with the managing partner at Kessler and Lane. They've been watching your progress, your pro bono work, your leadership, your speech earlier today. Elaine paused, then added with quiet pride, they're offering you a senior associate position, full benefits mentorship track, and a clear path to partner. It's rare, especially at your age. The words didn't land like a compliment. They landed like a verdict. And it was one Vivian couldn't appeal. Zuri blinked. Not because she doubted it, but because of the timing. Right here. Right now. In front of the people who had spent the entire evening doubting her, and in front of the man who had finally stood beside her. She rose to her feet, her bun still pristine, her presence regal. Thank you, Professor Carver, she said warmly. I'm honored. Truly. Elaine nodded, eyes flicking just briefly toward the Morose. You've got a star here, she said aloud. I hope her partner's family realizes that. Then she turned and exited as effortlessly as she had entered. No mic drop, no fireworks, just a truth laid bare for all to see. Zuri stood for a beat longer, allowing the moment to breathe. Then she sat back down, her hands resting softly on the tablecloth. Vivian cleared her throat. Well, that's impressive, she managed, voice tight. We didn't realize you had such prospects. Zuri smiled gently. You didn't ask, Mrs. Morrow. You assumed I didn't. Camille's cheeks flushed. Gerard shifted in his seat. Cale beside her let out a quiet breath, half relief, half awe. Because here it was the power shift. Zuri was no longer the outsider trying to be accepted. She was the woman everyone wanted at their table. And suddenly the Morrow name didn't feel so untouchable anymore. That was the 8th lesson Zuri carried from that night. Real power doesn't shout. It arrives quietly with receipts. And when it speaks, those who dismissed you will finally listen. The rest of the evening unfolded like a scene quietly rewritten. Guests approached to congratulate her. A judge from the appellate court asked for her contact. A classmate whispered, that was the boldest thing I've ever seen. But Zuri didn't let it go to her head. She let it settle in her bones like warmth after cold, like clarity after fog. As the dinner wound down and the waiters cleared the last plates, Zuri leaned toward Cale, her voice low. I didn't need that offer to feel whole, she said, but I'm glad they heard it. All of them. Cal's eyes met hers, soft with apology and pride. I'm with you, he said, for all of it, from here forward. And she believed him, not because of what he'd said, but because of what he'd done when it mattered most. The rooftop lights dimmed. The city pulsed beyond the glass. And Zuri, no longer waiting to be welcomed, was already imagining the world she was going to help build. But the journey wasn't over. Not with Vivian's silence still wrapped around her like fog. Not with Gerard's authority quietly bruised. And not with Camille's shame flickering fragile and uncertain. The reckoning had begun, but the healing, if it would ever come, was still ahead. Let's walk with Zuri a little further, because what comes after the power shift is the real test of legacy. In the days that followed, the rooftop dinner became a quiet legend among those who'd been there. Not for the food, not for the view, but because of the moment when the balance of power quietly shifted and a young black woman stood taller than the chandelier above her. But for Zuri, the real aftermath didn't unfold in whispers or headlines. It came in messages, in glances, in acts of reckoning, some small, some sincere, and some still unfinished. Camille was the first. A text arrived 2 mornings later. No emojis, no pretense. Just, can we talk soon? I'm trying to understand. Zuri hesitated. She wasn't interested in hollow apologies. But something about the tone, plain unguarded, felt like a door cracked open, not closed. A week later, they met at a quiet cafe in Lincoln Park. Camille showed up early, a leather notebook in hand, not a designer clutch. She ordered chamomile tea and sat stiffly, unsure of how to begin. I went to one of your talks, she finally said, about housing justice. I took notes. I didn't realize how deep it goes. She paused. I grew up blind to all of it, Zuri. I just assumed things worked the way they did because they always had. Zuri listened, not to judge, not to fix, just to witness. Camille's voice softened. I was wrong. About you. About a lot of things. And I'm sorry, it wasn't perfect. It wasn't poetic. But it was real. Zuri nodded gently. Thank you, Camille. Words are a start, but growth is what comes after. That was the ninth lesson Zuri had learned over years of patient witnessing. An apology is only as meaningful as the change it inspires. Remorse is a spark. Accountability is the flame. A few days later, another surprise came. This time an email. Subject line lunch. It was from Gerard. He requested to meet at a quiet restaurant near the firm where Zuri had just begun her position at Kessler and Lane. The tone was formal but respectful. He wanted to learn more about her work in housing equity, and so cautiously she accepted. The conversation was stilted at first. He asked about zoning codes, eviction statistics. He stumbled over the term redlining, mispronounced gentrification. But he listened. He asked questions. And near the end, he put down his fork, looked her in the eye and said, I misjudged you. I thought I knew what drive looked like. But you've redefined it for me. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was a crack in the wall. And for someone like Gerard, raised to keep the world at a polite distance, it was progress. Then there was Vivian. Zuri never expected warmth, but she had hope for something, a letter, a call, a pause in the storm. Instead, she received a brief card in the mail. Cream stationery, elegant font, no return address. Misunderstandings occur. Let's move forward. Best wishes, Vivian Morrow. No mention of the insults, no recognition of the harm, just an invitation to forget what Zuri could never unfeel. And that too was a lesson, because silence doesn't always mean regret. Sometimes it means retreat. Zuri didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her life was moving forward with or without Vivian's approval. She was building something new with Kale. They skipped the next Morrow family gala after Vivian refused to include Zuri's name on the RSVP. Kale didn't flinch. He chose Zuri again. This time with action, not just words. He started attending racial equity workshops. Listened more. Interrupted less. Asked the hard questions not to argue but to learn. And Zuri gave him room to grow. Not because she needed to, but because he earned the space one choice at a time. In love, just like justice, transformation isn't instant. It's daily. It's intentional. That was the quiet miracle of it all. The ones who truly love you don't just witness your fire, they learn how to carry it with you. But Zuri knew something else too. She didn't walk through that storm for apologies. She walked through it to clear the sky for others. And that clarity was already blooming. Because at the edge of change, there's always one more step. Let's take it with her. Because what she builds next isn't just for her. It's for everyone still waiting to be seen. A month later, the city breathed a different kind of summer. The kind that arrived not with heat waves, but with quiet revelations. Zuri stood by the edge of the Chicago River. Her tailored blazer, cinched against the evening breeze, jeans, rolled just above the ankle, lawyer, by daydreamer always. Her high bun still crowned her head, catching the glow of the city's neon reflections. The same bun that had once walked into rooms to prove she belonged, now walked forward, knowing she did. Kale stood beside her, his sweater sleeves pushed to the elbows, fingers laced gently with hers. No longer tense, no longer apologizing in silence, but present, still learning, still unlearning, but no longer watching from the sidelines. Behind them, the jazz club buzzed, notes spilling out like breath. Inside were friends, lawyers, artists, coders, baristas, activists. Not all polished, not all pedigreed, but real, a tapestry of stories stitched together by resilience. Zuri's phone buzzed. A message from her mom, proud of you always. Keep shining. She smiled, tucking it away like a blessing. In the weeks after that rooftop reckoning, Zuri had stepped into her new role at Kessler and Lane. Within her first 2 weeks, she'd already led a case that secured funding for a neighborhood community center, the same neighborhood where her father used to fix cars for free. She'd walked into boardrooms lined with suits and walked out with impact. Her work wasn't quiet anymore. It echoed. Camille had reached out again, this time to volunteer at one of Zuri's housing legal clinics. No makeup, no pretense, just questions, note-taking, and a humility Zuri hadn't seen at that dinner table. Gerard followed up on his promise too. He invited Zuri to speak at one of his real estate conferences about equity, about ethics. He didn't get it all right, but he listened, and Vivian. She stayed silent. still sent holiday cards addressed only to Kale, still circled around Zuri's name like it might stain the paper. But by then it didn't matter. Because Zuri had learned something essential. Legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you refuse to pass down. She wasn't waiting to be accepted anymore. She was rewriting the standard. That was the final lesson, perhaps the truest one of all. The fight for belonging doesn't end with one dinner, one speech, one confrontation. Because the real fight, the enduring one, is not just to be seen, but to make space for others to be seen too. And that's what Zuri was doing now. She and Kale hosted open mic nights for young professionals of color. They held space for honest conversation, some painful, some joyful, all necessary. They planned trips to cities layered in civil rights history, not as a form of escape, but of learning. Their love wasn't just romantic. It was revolutionary, rooted in accountability and growth. One night after a panel talk on justice and identity, Kale pulled Zuri aside. He looked at her not with awe, but with gratitude. "I used to think you changed my world," he whispered. "But the truth is, you taught me how to see it for the first time." Zuri didn't need the words, but she held them anyway. Because in the end, love and justice aren't just emotions or professions. They're choices, made again and again in rooms where your presence is questioned, and in rooms where your presence becomes the reason someone else dares to speak. The city moved around them. The river flowed on steady and unyielding. Just like her, Zuri Adabio, daughter, lawyer, partner, warrior, was still becoming, still building. And her story, like all great stories, wasn't finished. It had only just turned the page. Now it's your turn. What legacy are you writing? Whose voice are you making room for? Because maybe, just maybe, the real change begins with the choice to no longer stay silent. Thank you for joining Zuri Adabio's unforgettable journey. If her courage stirred something in you, leave a comment. Share where you're watching from, New York, Nairobi, or somewhere in between. And if you believe in stories that challenge, uplift, and heal, hit subscribe, because we've got more coming. Until next time, stay bold, stay open. And remember, the table doesn't define you. You define the table.